Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and a response to suffering. VIKTOR FRANKL. Have you ever felt sadness and before even understanding why, tried to silence the feeling with a phrase like, "It will pass, be grateful," or "think positive"? If so, know this: you are not alone, and this is not your failure. It is a reflection of a world that has become intolerant of what is real. We live in an era where pain has been turned into a taboo, where showing vulnerability seems almost like a sin, where any discomfort is quickly corrected with a rehearsed smile, an optimistic affirmation, a happy image. But at what cost? There is a positivity that heals, but there is another that sickens. It doesn't scream. It whispers like well-intentioned advice. It doesn't impose. It seduces like an easier path. But gradually, it turns legitimate emotions into threats. It replaces depth with performance, truth with veneer. This positivity is toxic, not for being positive, but for being false. False because it ignores half of the human experience, because it denies grief, anger, fear, insecurity. False because it convinces us that always being okay is a sign of evolution, when in fact it can be a sign of chronic denial of the soul. And here is the paradox: the more you try to stay positive all the time, the further you get from your own truth. How many times have you felt obligated to smile, even when you were destroyed inside? How many times have you blamed yourself for not being able to think positive in the face of a real loss? How many times have you swallowed your pain so as not to seem weak? This is the trap. Toxic positivity turns natural emotions into enemies. It says that feeling pain is a problem, when, in fact, pain is a calling, a sign that something inside us needs to be heard. But if the listening is suffocated, the pain doesn't disappear. It shifts. It transforms into anxiety, apathy, a nameless exhaustion. And the worst part, all of it disguised under a functional smile. It's a psychic theater, where the audience applauds while the protagonist drifts further and further away from themselves. Carl Jung said that nothing is more dangerous than a repressed truth. And this emotional repression, wrapped in motivational phrases, is one of the most silent forms of self-abandonment. But why do we fall into this trap? Because we were taught that being okay all the time is an obligation. Because we confuse acceptance with resignation. Because we confuse courage with insensitivity. Because we confuse spirituality with emotional escape. But the soul is not fooled. It knows when we are trying to silence what we should be listening to. Toxic positivity is, deep down, an attempt to control over what we don't want to feel, over what we don't know how to handle, over what society hasn't taught us to name. But there is another way of being alive. A way where feeling isn't failure, it's courage. Where sadness isn't weakness, it's a sign of connection. Where anger isn't a loss of control, it's a boundary. And perhaps this is the great question. What happens to a soul that is only allowed to feel half of what it carries? That's what we are going to explore. Because maybe what needs to be healed isn't the feeling, but the idea that we cannot feel it. The problem with toxic positivity isn't the desire for good things, but the denial of what is real to maintain an appearance of well-being. At its origin, it doesn't seem like a threat. It comes as advice, encouragement, even affection. But the truth is that, gradually, this compulsory positivity becomes a system of self-deception and emotional repression. From an early age, we learn that feeling sad is ugly, showing anger is wrong, showing weakness is failing. Uncomfortable emotions are framed as character flaws, not as natural parts of existence. Thus, we grow up thinking that being okay all the time is an ideal to be pursued. Except this ideal isn't human, it's an advertisement. It wasn't made to accommodate our complexity, but to turn us into emotional consumers. We buy promises of happiness. We compare ourselves to showcases of perfection on social media, and we use canned phrases as crutches to avoid facing what we really feel. We were trained to silence pain with a smile, to answer everything's fine even when everything is falling apart, to be grateful for what we have, even when we are emotionally exhausted. But gratitude without truth is escape. Optimism without depth is illusion, and therein lies the hidden problem. Toxic positivity doesn't teach us to deal with pain, only to hide it better. Carl Jung said that what we deny in ourselves controls us from the outside. When we don't make space to feel, our repressed emotions begin to manifest in other ways, in the body, in dreams, in relationships, in addictions. A pain that is not welcomed does not disappear. It just changes its mask. At its philosophical root, this connects to the contemporary view of happiness as a constant, superficial state measured by productivity, image, and external acceptance. Instead of becoming whole, we seek to become pleasant. Instead of listening to ourselves, we correct ourselves all the time. This leads us to live in an amputated emotional reality, where there is only room for the luminous half of life, where the shadow is denied, exiled, silenced. But every silenced shadow becomes a symptom. Every ignored feeling turns into a rupture. If this reflection is opening something in you, consider subscribing to the channel. There are others like it waiting for you. Because maybe you don't need another pretty phrase. You need a space to feel everything you were taught to hide. How many times have you smiled when what you wanted was to scream? How many times have you heard, "It will pass," when all you needed was, "I understand"? How many times have you felt wrong for feeling bad? This compulsory positivity has deep roots in our culture, but also in our personal histories. Maybe you grew up in a home where crying was a sign of weakness, where asking for help was a shame, where you learned too early that being loved required being okay, or at least appearing to be. And so you became a master at hiding pain, to the point where sometimes even you no longer know where it begins. This internal confusion between what you feel and what you should feel generates a progressive distance from yourself. You start to distrust your own emotions, to treat them as enemies, to filter every feeling before allowing it to exist. And in this process, spontaneity is lost. Connection, the ability to trust yourself. Because how can you trust someone you don't listen to? The root of the problem lies in dissociation, a disconnection between the emotional experience and the mental narrative we try to impose on it. We say, "Everything is fine," when in fact we are exhausted. "I can handle it," when we are on the verge of collapse. "I am grateful," when we are emotionally numb. This distance between what is felt and what is claimed to be felt creates a psychic vacuum. A space where the soul no longer has a voice, where the body screams and the mind pretends not to hear. And it is in this space that symptoms arise: chronic anxiety, insomnia, panic attacks, a constant feeling of inadequacy. Symptoms that are often treated with more positivity, creating a cycle of emotional denial. It takes courage to break away from this, the courage to say, "I'm not okay. I need to feel this to the end. I don't want to pretend everything is all right anymore." This courage isn't a loss of control. It's an awakening, because what is real doesn't have to be pretty to be true, and what is true often hurts, but it liberates. The consequences of toxic positivity don't appear all at once. They seep into life subtly, like cracks that gradually shake the foundations of what seems solid. And when we realize it, we no longer know for sure where we got lost. We just feel the fatigue of maintaining a version of ourselves that no longer matches what pulses within. One of the first consequences is emotional alienation. You continue to live, function, deliver, but without being truly present. The emotions that should alert, guide, and heal you are silenced. Pain, which should be a compass, becomes an enemy. Sadness, which could be a bridge, becomes an obstacle. And with that, the soul loses access to itself. This disconnection generates a second devastating consequence: internal invalidation. Every time you feel something true and respond to yourself with a canned phrase like, "Don't think about it," "You're overreacting," or "Be strong," you are saying, "One, what I feel is not legitimate." And when this is repeated for long enough, the effect is devastating. You stop trusting yourself, and without emotional self-trust, the void emerges. A void that has no name because it wasn't heard. A void that isn't an absence of meaning, it's an absence of listening. It is the muted soul. Living anesthetized becomes the new normal. The routine continues, but with less color. Relationships persist, but without depth. Choices are made, but without a soul. It's like living on a stage where the script was written by someone else, and all that's left is to perform well. And the more you repress, the more the body screams. Constant headaches, muscle tension, insomnia, palpitations, chronic fatigue. The body tries to process what the mind refuses, and what isn't transformed into truth transforms into a symptom. Even worse, many people interpret these symptoms as signs of personal weakness and redouble the dose of forced positivity. They enter cycles of compulsive self-help, misapplied gratitude techniques, mantras that don't resonate. And with that, the distance from one's own pain becomes a survival strategy, and not a cure. Toxic positivity also affects relationships. It makes everything superficial. Instead of real dialogues, we exchange memorized phrases. Instead of listening, advice. Instead of presence, solutions. This isn't connection, it's emotional performativity. And this comes at a price: relational loneliness. You can be surrounded by people, but if no one validates what you truly feel, loneliness is inevitable. The silence imposed within also becomes silence on the outside, and you start to think you're exaggerating, that you feel wrong, that you're too emotional. This self-censorship is a type of self-abandonment, and all self-abandonment generates a pain that is difficult to name but easy to recognize. That feeling of being disconnected, even from yourself. If you've ever felt something like this, feel free to share. The comments are often the echo of many who feel alone. Save this video. Maybe you'll need to hear this again when you forget that feeling is human. The most tragic invisible consequence, however, is the loss of the right to exist wholly. You begin to believe that you only deserve love, acceptance, and space when you are well, when you are functional, when you are not a bother. And this creates an internal conditioning. Feeling becomes synonymous with a threat, vulnerability, a defect, pain, a failure. It is a prison without bars, built with smiles. And in this emotional prison, the soul sickens. But there is still something sacred in this collapse. It is here that what really matters is revealed. Because when everything false crumbles, what's left is the truth. And that truth, however uncomfortable, is the first step toward real healing. And this healing doesn't begin with advice. It begins with permission. Permission to feel, to fall apart, to say, "I don't know how to deal with this." Permission to be human, with all that it involves. Because it is in this non-judgmental space that emotion once again becomes a bridge, not an obstacle. When you stop correcting yourself emotionally, you start to truly listen to yourself. You begin to build a new relationship with yourself, one not based on control, but on compassion. And this listening changes everything. You begin to identify what is yours and what is an imposition, what is legitimate pain and what is introjected guilt. You begin to build a deeper, more subtle emotional vocabulary, a vocabulary that allows for nuance, that welcomes contradiction, that understands that feeling anger doesn't nullify love, that feeling fear doesn't nullify courage, that feeling sadness doesn't nullify gratitude. This emotional refinement is the beginning of a new cycle, the cycle of authenticity. And it is here that true relief begins to emerge, not because the pain has disappeared, but because it has finally been heard. The rebellion against toxic positivity is not loud. It doesn't happen in fiery speeches or dramatic ruptures. It happens in a silent and intimate moment, almost invisible to the world's eyes. The moment you decide to stop running from yourself, to stop correcting feelings, to stop responding to pain with canned phrases, to stop trying to be the one who pleases and start being the one who feels. This is the first gesture of rebellion, allowing yourself to feel without censorship, without aesthetics, without a filter, feeling as an act of presence, as a reconciliation with everything that toxic positivity tried to amputate. But this path is not easy. It requires courage, the courage to dive into discomfort, to listen to what was silenced, to relearn how to name forgotten emotions, to deal with what is incoherent, contradictory, human. It is a process of emotional re-education, and like any new beginning, it starts small, in a diary written hastily at the end of the day, in a cry you don't hold back, in an "I'm not okay" said with truth, in a hug you allow yourself to receive without needing to justify it. These small gestures are acts of symbolic disobedience. They break the cycle of repression. They create space for the soul to breathe. And gradually you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Relief. Relief from not having to perform, from not having to be an example, from not having to seem unshakable. Relief from simply existing with everything you feel. This relief is the beginning of healing. And with time, you begin to build rituals of truth, inner spaces where emotion can exist without being interrupted. It could be a mindful bath, a moment without stimulation, a meditation where you don't try to clear thoughts, just observe them, a conversation with someone who knows how to listen. It is in these moments that the soul reoccupies the body, that presence returns. That feeling begins to make sense again. If this content is a refuge for you, consider becoming a channel member. For less than 8 Rs a month, you support this project and access exclusive content made for those who have chosen to feel with awareness. Because this emotional awareness needs nourishment. It needs space. It needs community. And maybe you are now rediscovering a new form of spirituality, one that doesn't deny pain, but integrates it. That doesn't promise a quick cure but offers deep reconnection. That doesn't demand perfection, but celebrates presence. This is the most radical rebellion, to live whole. To not divide your humanity between what can be shown and what must be hidden. To choose authenticity, even when it's uncomfortable. Because real discomfort will always be more transformative than false comfort. You begin to realize that you are not here to win every day. You are here to live. And living is also failing, falling, crying, feeling fear. And this doesn't diminish you. It humanizes you. You begin to surround yourself with people who know how to listen without correcting, who know how to welcome without trying to fix, who know how to be present without needing to explain. And little by little, this inner space becomes a home. Not a home without pain, but a home where pain is no longer exile. You realize you don't need big answers. You need small truths. Truths that only appear when you stop fighting against what you feel. You become more compassionate with yourself. You start to look inward with less judgment. You learn that healing isn't getting better. It's integrating. It's not erasing what hurt you. It's giving it a safe place to exist without dominating you. The emotional rebellion in this sense is subtle but powerful, because it breaks centuries of conditioning. It breaks with family patterns, with cultural inheritances, with internal systems of self-censorship. And it gives back to you what toxic positivity tried to steal: the right to be whole. You start to trust yourself again, to recognize the internal signals, to respect your body's limits, your soul's rhythms, the wisdom of your emotions. And then, a new freedom emerges. Not the freedom to always be well, but to always be true. And that, in itself, is profoundly liberating. In the end, you realize, true strength is not in always being well, it is in always being whole. And being whole includes the pain, the fear, the emptiness, the doubt, the anger, the guilt. It includes everything you tried to hide to seem strong. This is the most powerful realization. You don't have to seem like anything. You just have to be with truth, to be with presence, to be with humanity. And this truth is not learned from books. It is revealed in silence, in the pauses, in the moments when you give up controlling the narrative and simply feel, without judging yourself, without trying to understand, just feel. You begin to realize that pain, when listened to, doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to return you to something you lost along the way. Maybe the connection with yourself, maybe the courage to feel, maybe the dignity to exist without needing to justify every emotion. At this point, you no longer seek to get better. You seek to get closer to yourself, to others, to life. Toxic positivity taught you that only those who are well deserve love. The deep truth teaches you deserve love, especially when you are unwell, because it is in these moments that you need yourself the most. And if you are present, even if no one else is, you will no longer be alone. This new presence changes everything. It changes how you treat yourself, how you treat others, how you see the world. You begin to trade demands for compassion, haste for patience, appearance for essence. Life, once a race, now breathes. And with that, something in you relaxes. Not because all the problems have disappeared, but because you are now with you. And when that happens, everything changes color. The joy that arises from this presence is not euphoric, it is serene. It is not loud, it is deep. It does not demand a spectacle, only space. And then you understand. Everything you tried to avoid, the discomfort, the tears, the sadness, the insecurity, were just parts of you wanting to be seen. And now, you can see them and love them. This is the rarest freedom. That of no longer abandoning yourself. You no longer need to explain yourself, nor hide, nor numb yourself. You can live in a radically simple way, feeling, listening, existing. And in doing so, you become a shelter for yourself, for others, for life. And the beauty of this realization is that it no longer requires strength. It requires surrender. You stop fighting with life, and you start walking with it. Not as one who dominates, but as one who dances. Because to live whole is this, to dance with the light and with the shadow, with laughter and with tears, with the yes and with the no, and to know that all of this is part of being human. You no longer need to divide your existence between what is acceptable and what is excessive. You just need to be with yourself, wholly. This is revolution. A silent, intimate revolution that begins in you but touches everyone around you. Because those who feel with truth inspire others to do the same. Those who permit their pain also permit the pain of others. And thus a new kind of bond is born, made of truth, not performance. And in this new bond, no one needs to save anyone. Just be present. And to be present in this world that demands so much appearing is an act of love. This presence even changes what you desire. You no longer want so much. You want less, but you want it with truth. You want honest silences instead of forced conversations. You want hugs that say, "I'm here," and not solutions that say, "Get well soon." You want companionship that knows how to remain even when there is nothing to say. You learn that not everything needs to be resolved. Some things just need to be felt. Not everything needs an answer. Some questions just need time. And with that time, you flourish. Not because you conquered something, but because you stopped pruning yourself. This is the flourishing that toxic positivity tried to prevent. The kind that is born from feeling, not from faking. And you realize, finally, that pain was your most honest teacher, because it didn't ask you to be better, it asked you to be more you. And when you accept this invitation, life changes its tone. It doesn't get easier, but it gets more real. And what is real, even when it hurts, liberates. There are other reflections like this waiting for you.